Dinosaurs are no longer just dinosaurs. Okay, they're still technically dinosaurs, but over the years, paleontologists have found so many feathered dinosaurs that some scientists now prefer to call them dino birds instead. In fact, birds are technically dinosaurs, specifically avian dinosaurs, so we suppose calling them birds is more accurate. But that hasn't stopped people from wondering, how the heck did dinosaurs evolve to grow feathers? Feathers are basically unique to birds. No other modern animal has anything quite like them, which makes it hard for scientists to understand what natural forces could have led to their evolution. And because feathers are made mostly of keratin, the same substance that makes your nails and hair, they don't preserve well in the fossil record. Most of the time, all that's left of a dino bird's feathers is a collection of fuzzy impressions left on the rock around them, which doesn't exactly make for great CSI. So figuring out how and why feathers evolved has been a bit of a head-scratcher. But since the 1990s, researchers have found a lot of exceptionally preserved fossils of feathered dinosaurs in China, which has given us a lot more to work with. And the answer seems to lie in the way those ancient animals kept themselves cool. Hi, it's me and welcome to this channel. When it comes to keeping cool, mammals have sweat glands that help dissipate heat by secreting a salty sweat onto their skin. But sweat isn't very effective if you're covered in fur or scales. So birds have evolved to pant and spread their feathers to increase airflow over their bodies. But obviously, birds didn't just suddenly evolve these traits one generation after another. These adaptations didn't appear fully formed. They had to gradually develop over millions of years, leaving behind traces of awkward evolutionary experiments along the way. And thanks to those Chinese fossils, we can trace the origins of panting and the evolution of feathers back through time. The oldest fossils found so far come from a relative of Ankylosaurus called Sinosauropteryx. It lived during the late Jurassic period, about 160 million years ago, and it looked like an ordinary scaled dinosaur, except for one thing. A few feathers sprouted from its tail. In 2007, researchers described another species called Archaeopteryx. This dino bird also had a bunch of long, thin feathers that were similar to modern bird feathers. But unlike birds, it had long, sharp claws at the end of its hand and foot bones. So it could climb trees and wasn't ready for flight yet. Then there was Microraptor, whose fossils date back to the early Cretaceous, about 125 million years ago. Unlike Sinosauropteryx and Archaeopteryx, Microraptor was actually good at gliding between trees. Its four limbs were feathered, including the arms, which helped it steer, and its tail, which acted like a rudder. Even though Microraptor could glide, it couldn't exactly fly. It couldn't lift off the ground on its own. It wasn't until about 10 million years later that we see creatures that were capable of true sustained flight. One such bird was Archaeopteryx. Compared to modern birds, its wings were relatively small, and it had a long tail that ended in a bony, pointed structure called a pygostyle. Archaeopteryx had feathers, but its hand and feet were clawed and scaly, meaning that it could perch in trees, but not very good at climbing around in them. Another bird that evolved around the same time was the famous Confuciusornis. It didn't have any teeth or a keel bone, which is a large flat bone in the chest that helps support powerful flight muscles. Yet it was also flight capable, which tells us that flying doesn't necessarily require these features. So it seems that the transition from climbing to flying needed a few different solutions. Various dinosaurs experimented with growing different kinds of feathers, developing ways to use those feathers for steering and balancing, and ultimately evolving the right size and shape for powered flight. The fossils we've been discussing so far all come from animals that had feathers covering their whole body, including their legs. But in 2018, a new species called Caudipteryx zui came onto the scene and shook things up a little. This dino bird had feathers too, but only on its arms and tail. Its legs stayed scaly, which begs the question, how did it get around on the ground? Feathers are lightweight and airy, so it would have been easy for Caudipteryx to lose its footing and fall over if it tried to take off while running. If that's the case, then it means that feathers weren't necessary for balance and maneuvering on the ground. So perhaps our original question should be, how did feathered dinosaurs manage to walk without toppling over? One possible solution is that feathered dinosaurs were actually pretty clumsy. In 2020, one team of scientists proposed that many of these animals couldn't really run at all. Instead, they kind of shuffled on the ground. Their legs were spread wide and straight underneath their bodies, and their ankles were stiff and immobile. They might have also had big gaps between the toes on each foot, which would have made standing and walking tricky. Basically, if you've ever tried walking with one of those kiddie walkers, you'll know that moving around onto legs is a lot harder than it looks. So maybe flying was worth the struggle. Another explanation for how feathered dinosaurs walked is that they used their tails for support, kind of like a kangaroo does. When kangaroos hop, they hold their tails straight out behind them to keep their balance. And some feathered dinosaurs, like Caudipteryx, had long, strong tails with flexible spines towards the end, which may have helped them stabilize themselves. But whether or not that's true, it's clear that walking and running with feathers wasn't impossible. After all, there are lots of modern birds that have feathers on their legs, like ostriches and emus, and they can run just fine. So perhaps feathered dinosaurs didn't need to evolve special adaptations to stay upright. It's just that we haven't discovered any fossils of ostrich-like feathered dinosaurs yet. We tend to focus on the birds that are related to modern birds when we study evolution. But over the past decade or so, paleontologists have found several groups of feathered dinosaurs that are unrelated to birds, and none of them seem to have had feathers on their legs. So for now, it looks like having naked legs was a prerequisite for being a dino bird. But why? Well, it could have been a trade-off between feathers on the legs and feathers on the arms. Maybe the genetic changes needed to grow feathers on the front legs inhibited feather growth on the back legs, or vice versa. Or maybe feathers on the legs were selected against. Having feathers on your legs could have been bad news if you spent a lot of time in water. Extra weight could have made it harder to swim. And depending on how dense the feathers were, they could have been cumbersome underwater, slowing you down or even making it harder to dive. If dinosaurs wanted to spend a lot of time in water, they might have needed to shed their leg feathers. But we can't say for sure, because none of the feathered dinosaurs we've discussed so far lived in water, at least not according to the evidence we have now. Plus, if having feathers on your legs was so terrible, it's weird that modern birds deal with it just fine. Maybe it is possible to be a competent swimmer with feathery legs. It just hasn't happened yet. The earliest birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs roughly 150 million years ago, which means they've had plenty of time to figure it out. But for now, they seem to be sticking with the strategy of shedding their flight feathers when they want to go for a dip. As for why our scaly ancestors gave feathers a try in the first place, nobody knows for sure. Someday, we may find a relative of dinosaurs with more primitive feathers that can tell us more about what early feathers were like and how they evolved. In the meantime, we'll just have to keep scratching our heads and our scaly legs. Thanks for watching.